reacting to external demands or instruction rather than in ways determined by his own interests and energies and power. He says we may admire what he does, but we despise what he is. For Humboldt, then, man is born to inquire and create. And when a man or a child chooses to inquire or create out of his own free choice, then he becomes in his own terms an artist rather than a tool of production or a well-trained parent.
Welcome to the 50th episode of the Diet Soap Podcast, which is going out on Thursday, March 25th, 2010. I'm Douglas Lane, the host of this podcast, and the title of this episode will be Yet Another Question. The question is this: is there no alternative? The guest this week is Dmitry Orlov, the author of the book Reinventing Collapse. Dmitry suggests that we innovate and modernize and reinvent so that we no longer have to collapse in the old-fashioned way. And you'll be hearing all about that in just a moment. I want to thank everybody who emailed me or commented on last week's podcast, and say hello to Ace on YouTube, who said that he agreed with both James Howard Kunstler and myself. I also want to thank Joe the Drummer and Mark C. for their kind donations. These two fine folks went to dietsoap.podomatic.com and clicked on the PayPal button to make a donation. So thanks, guys. You both made a big difference. So there's a lot of episode this week, and rather than go on and on at this point, let's just jump right into Isto singing When the Morning Comes, My Darling, and then listen to my conversation with Dmitry Orlov, wherein we discuss whether it's true that there is no alternative.
When the morning comes, my darling, and the sunlight floods the room, we will face the day together. We will watch the flowers bloom. Though we battle flying monkeys, they will all be dead by then. When the morning comes, my darling, you'll be in my arms again.
Dmitry Orlov, you are an engineer and also a writer on subjects related to the potential economic, ecological, and political decline and collapse of the United States. This is something you've called the permanent crisis. You were born in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, and moved to the United States at the age of 12. In 2005 and 2006, you wrote a number of articles comparing the collapse preparedness of the United States with the Soviet Union. Your book, Reinventing Collapse, The Soviet Example and American Prospects, was published in 2008 and further detailed your view. Your most recent book is entitled Hold Your Applause, and on the book, which is a limited edition volume of essays from your blog at cluborlov.blogspot.com, you wrote that the meaning of the title should be obvious, that since 2005 you've been predicting that the U.S. would go the way of the Soviet Union, of the USSR, and many of your predictions have unfolded or are unfolding. People should hold their applause, so because it hasn't quite come to fruition yet. So do you have anything you want to add to or correct about that bio?
No, that's essentially correct.
So tell me a little bit more about your book, Hold the Applause, and what you've been doing at your blog.
Well, the blog is pretty active. I average around 2,000 visitors a day. I think I'm approaching the 1 million visitor mark overall over the 3 or so years that the blog has been in existence. It's fairly active. Sometimes it gets a little bit too much in terms of the number of comments that get submitted, because I try to keep the comments readable, unlike most other blogs where it's just lots and lots of stuff that nobody particularly wants to look at. I try to moderate the comments so that the quality is high enough for somebody to want to read it, and that has turned into, on occasion, into a full-time job. So basically, I decided to make some money off the blog so that I'd have the resources to write my next book, and it turned out to be a really good idea. So I'm accepting donations, and in return, I send out a free gift, which is this limited edition, nicely typeset book of my essays. And unlike a lot of books which are interesting because the information in them is fresh, this book is interesting because the information in this book is 5 years old, and a lot of it. And in spite of that, it looks extremely accurate and on target. And some people are saying that it's prescient, that I saw the future. And that makes it interesting. It's a little bit of a time capsule already. It'll be even more of a time capsule a few years from now when the rest of the predictions are borne out, as may very well happen.
What kinds of things are you adding to your blog? How do you go about that process? Are you constantly researching? Are you commenting on other people's blogs? What could we expect to find at Club Orlov?
Well, it's very hard to predict which way it'll go. That's the part that makes it interesting. For instance, I wrote an article on something that I'm becoming very interested in, which is, we have industrial capacity right now that is being used to mainly make junk that goes into landfill a year or so later. Because of planned obsolescence and because of the product development cycle where companies try to constantly produce a stream of slightly upgraded products. Because of all that, the longevity of manufactured products is very, very low. And as the raw materials such as oil and natural gas and various strategic metals are depleted, which they are at a very rapid pace, our ability to manufacture things will dwindle to nothing. So one of the absolutely strategic shifts that has to be accomplished in the near future is to start making things that are much more durable, quite possible technically, and that will last for the lifetime of the user and possibly even become a heirloom, so that people receive various manufactured items as part of their inheritance and then pass it on to their children and grandchildren, because none of this stuff is going to be made anymore. So I wrote an article on that, and then somebody else responded, somebody who has basically been living out in the wilderness for years and years, and he can't really see why any of these manufactured products would be all that particularly useful, because it all hinges on the ability to eat and to feed people. And that is the main thrust, of what he said. And it's not really a criticism of what I said. It's just, it's just that the actual perception of what it is like to survive without industry is really rather different from what you and I might come up with on our own. So that's kind of an example of where I try to drive a discussion in what I hope is a fruitful direction, and then somebody comes out of the blue and kind of blows my boat a little bit out of the water, and that's not unexpected.
When you make the suggestion that the primary problem we're going to be facing is just adequate food production, that's such a radical break from the way people think about their lives on a daily level now that it's sort of hard to fathom. But certainly if we were to reach a point where for the majority of, say, I don't know, for lack of a better word, first world people were struggling just to feed themselves, that the other kinds of issues like, can we create durable goods to, rather than goods with planned obsolescence, would have to be sort of addressed at the same time. I would think that you would that whole economy would have already gone by the time we reach the point where we can't even feed ourselves. Am I naive there, or am I missing something?
I don't think you're missing a whole lot. What people generally don't understand about their food production is basically their food comes from a very small and dwindling number of over-the-hill farmers that are nearing retirement, or they're postponing their retirement because they don't want to give up the farm. And a lot of it comes from very large agribusinesses and all of it depends on a steady flow of fossil fuel inputs and some mined materials. And all of it is very energy intensive. So basically, if any part of this very complicated system starts to fail, and one of the parts that can fail is financing, because you have to finance the entire operation from planting to harvest. In order to till the field, you have to basically borrow money against the future harvest. So that can fail. The energy inputs might be missing. That happened in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union a lot. Is they grew bumper crops, but they didn't have the fuel to harvest them. So a lot of the harvest went basically rotted out in the field. That may happen. And then the basic problem is that without all of this energy, growing food becomes a non-mechanical proposition, which means that people have to do it largely by hand with animal assistance from horses and mules. And there actually have to be people who will do it. Mexican migrants are not going to do it. So lots and lots of Americans will actually be out there growing their own food. That's the only thing that can plausibly happen. And as it turns out, growing your own food takes a lot of practice. You don't just go out there and start doing it and expect to survive that way immediately. It takes a few years at least. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. Now, what will make it even more difficult is that the climate upheaval, which we are witnessing even right now, even this year, just the record amounts of snow, for instance, is clearly related to global warming, will cause a lot of harvests to fail. So we will have to be much better at growing food than we are now in order to grow the same amount of food or of the same quality. So there are a lot of challenges, and the eerie thing about it is that this is all being ignored by the mainstream and being very closely paid attention to by a rather small group of people who've dedicated themselves to actually reversing this situation. And they're making some inroads. You know, I hear reports from people who go to various conferences and get-togethers in the Midwest dedicated to growing food, and the conventional farmers, the mechanized farmers, their get-togethers are all pretty much doom and gloom. They're going broke. They're getting old. Harvests are failing more often than not. They're sad. And then you go to these organic growers who are basically who are growing food for farmers markets and things like that, and putting together community-supported agriculture systems and all of that, and they're fired up. You know, times have never been better as far as they're concerned. So there's this just complete disconnect between what has to happen and what is happening.
You know, I have a question about the financial system as kind of an input that could fail in our complicated social system, and how you treat that and how we should deal with that. But I want to come back to it. Instead, one thing that I think is kind of interesting about our current situation is that, rightly or wrongly, there's a tendency maybe to start valuing different sets of skills and knowledge than we typically have in the last 100 years or so. So, for instance, my family is friendly with a checker at Safeway. And this is a lady who is in her 50s, who grew up in eastern Oregon, and who grew up on a farm, but a farm that was mostly used just to sustain the family, just a subsistence level. You know, they traded with their neighbors and stuff, but they were dirt poor, literally. And she isn't particularly highly educated, but she knows how to grow food. She knows how to can and preserve fruits and vegetables. And she was willing to. We haven't really had this training course yet, but she's willing to, come over. She comes over sometimes and help us figure out how to manage our own land. Not very much of it, but our own backyard garden, and preserve what we grow and give us some tips. And she says, looking at our yard, oh yeah, you could grow enough food for your whole family on this plot if you did it right. So she's going to be the kind of person that maybe everyone will start turning to if things start to collapse, I think.
I think that, there are people in our own communities that know things that we should know, we should learn. And one problem that we have is that we have really denigrated them. We have lowered their status over the years because we've really underemphasized resilience and self-sufficiency. We've all decided that it's very important for us to sort of fit into this social scheme, this financial scheme, and even though it's not really working for us anymore, it's really fading away. And we still cling to this notion that an actual connection with somebody who has a really strong tie to the earth that feeds us is just a lowly sort of not upwardly mobile person. We're ignoring the fact that none of us are upwardly mobile anymore because there's no room left at the top, and the room at the top is actually shrinking. So I think that not only will we have to start paying attention to these humbler people in our midst, but I think we will need to import a lot of people from the third world who know how to survive in a third world environment and to learn from them.
But I think in most cases, it's not about planning the original shock. It's about being in an acute state of intellectual disaster preparedness.
And that meant people wandering through cities, being simply pulled by the attractions that you could find in a city, or repulsed by things that were ugly and hateful.
Society is going to bite the big one. And like Wes says, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but the smart money's going to head for the hills.
So that when the crisis hits, you're the ones who are ready with the ideas that are lying around. And so that's what happened when the levees broke, is that the Heritage Foundation was ready with their 32 free market solutions for Hurricane Katrina. And the first one was roll back labor standards. The next one was school vouchers instead of public school funding, and on and on.
Sonny, can you wait just a minute? I want to see what happens when society bites the big one.
And I tell you something, the faculty are a bunch of employees, and we're the raw materials. But we're a bunch of raw materials that don't mean to have any process upon us, don't mean to be made into any product, don't mean to end up being bought by some clients of the university, be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings.
Mister, can I see one of those magazines?
Well, sure, partner. And your training fee can be applied toward the down payment on a Wes Hundley Deluxe Survival Hideaway.
It's not working anymore. Capitalism is not working.
How we have advanced thanks to the machine.
How we have advanced thanks to the machine.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Why have you called me?
I've discovered a new thought.
Tell it to me then.
It's a terrible thought. It will frighten you.
Fear is out of date. Tell me.
The machine stops.
What do you say?
The machine is stopping. I know the signs.
Can you imagine anything more absurd?
Happens society is going to bite the big one. And like Wes says, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but the smart money's going to head for the hills.
They want to not only negate art, but as in the way De Boer put it, also realize it, which is to say, make of daily life a creative, continuously original, delirious, ecstatic experience.
How was the Soviet Union better prepared for collapse than the United States is today?
Well, the Soviet Union and Russia today is the largest producer of oil in the world, second largest importer most of the time. Very large reserves of natural gas as well. A lot of underdeveloped resources because they're at this point a little bit too expensive to develop. Unclear, there's an energy calculus that goes into whether a given province actually produces enough economic gain to be worth developing. It's not just a question of whether you have the resources, it's whether it makes sense to exploit them. But Russia was always self-sufficient as far as energy. It was always an exporter. So even when the finances of the Soviet Union were wrecked by record low oil prices, when North Sea in the UK and Norway and Prudhoe Bay in Alaska went on stream, that depressed the prices and broke OPEC and also broke the Soviet Union. In spite of that, there were no serious shortages of fuel. There were a lot of disruptions, little disruptions, but nothing. No systemic collapse happened as a result of the financial collapse. Now, the United States imports 2/3 of transportation fuel that it uses, which is oil, and a lot of that is financed because there's a trade deficit. It is not very likely that situation will hold together. So, if the United States loses access to 2/3 of all of the transportation fuels, not much will happen economically within the United States. It will be as if the economy just simply disappeared. There may be some emergency management people who will still get around. The military might still have access to fuel, but regular citizens will no longer be able to drive, will no longer be able to get where they're going, and things will be pretty much at a standstill. If you look at the structure of the economy of the United States, the gross domestic product correlates very highly to vehicle miles traveled. When vehicle miles traveled goes down, there's a recession, and GDP goes down as well. So what would a 2/3 reduction in vehicle miles traveled mean for the size of the economy and for its ability to finance the fantastic debt burden that has been accumulated? Well, it basically means that the country is in default financially, that it has no access to foreign credit, no access to imports, and doesn't really have much of an economy anymore. So that's the difference in preparation and what that means.
Well, what you're describing there seems to me to be our situation within this neoliberal kind of global economy and the prospects for Americans' future within that system. I'm wondering if we could possibly mitigate the coming collapse without changing how we relate to the world, without changing the terms of the economy.
Well, I think that people get very fixated on finance and on politics, and geopolitics, and they forget that this is really all just energy flows. This is all pipelines and tankers full of oil that have to circulate, and in return, product that has to be shipped somewhere. So it is a barter economy. The global economy is, at a fundamental level, a barter economy. You can distort it for a long time by making foreign governments feel insecure unless they have a lot of dollars or treasury paper in their vaults. And that can distort the economy to the point where they're willing to ship us oil or manufactured products in exchange for nothing, in exchange for promises. But eventually everything snaps back to equilibrium where these promises start to ring hollow, and then the flows of the things being bartered stop. And that is more or less inevitable. It's just like you cannot create a perpetual motion engine. You cannot create a perpetual credit-generating or debt-generating engine. Mm-hmm. At some point, it stops. Now, something like the United States has tremendous inertia. So in 2005, when I wrote those articles, it was absolutely clear to me that the entire debt pyramid that the United States rests atop of will unwind, will crumble. I don't know how long it'll take, but nobody right now says that, oh, no, it's not crumbling, it's in fine shape. So it's already clear that the trend is in a particular direction. It's already clear that it will eventually run its course. The question is how long it will take.
Well, it seems to me that you're quite right that the economy is all about directing energy flows, who gets what kind of energy from the natural world and how we use that energy. But it also strikes me that those energy flows are directed in a way that's conscious, at least on some level. These are decisions that we make. We decide whether or not we're going to invest in mass transit, use our energy and resources to develop that, or whether or not we're going to lay down more interstate highways or try to produce more cars. These are decisions, and we also decide how we're going to what kind of system we're going to use to direct the energy flows. And my question was sort of, aren't we required at this point to change that system?
Well, I think that you're making a lot of assumptions. You're using the word "we," and you're ascribing a certain amount of meaning to that word. You're also saying that whatever this "we" entity is that you use has some decision-making potential. And I don't really see it that way. First of all, there is no "we." There's just basically a mass of people organized using a system that has benefited them in the past. Now, what they will do is they'll cling to the arrangement that has benefited them in the past, way past the point where it no longer benefits them, because they can't think of anything better, because there is nothing better. That is generally what people do in such a situation. It works at every level. Right now in Washington, you have a lot of people who are interested in pork, right? They're interested in pleasing lobbyists. They're pleasing nobody in the process. They're very unpopular at this point, but all they can do is basically keep doing what they've been doing and hoping that it starts working again, because they can't think of anything better to do, because there isn't anything better to do. So there isn't really this idea that we'll suddenly reach an inflection point where suddenly we'll invest in mass transit, for instance. That just isn't going to happen. And the other thing that's happening is, you see, you make the right decisions before the problems begin. If you don't make the right decisions before the problems begin, then you don't have the opportunity to do it. You don't decide to start exercising after you've had a stroke, for instance. Oh, I had a stroke. Now I'll take up, jogging, mountain climbing. It doesn't work that way. Same thing here. Once the economy suffers a stroke, you don't have the money to invest in a public transportation network. You are basically stuck with whatever dysfunctional infrastructure you already have, and the best you can do is keep it from crumbling.
Well, I feel like we haven't quite had that stroke yet, first of all. I mean, that's why we have to hold our applause. Yeah, this word "we," I guess I don't mean we as in the United States and its government and the social structure as it stands now and the power relationships as they stand now. I just mean we as in the common people in the United States who have the potential anyway to make decisions as to how they want to be governed or how they want to structure society. I mean, it's going to be a difficult struggle, but ultimately I think that the system relies on cooperation from a lot of people, and that these people are conscious entities that have some certain amount of free will and can make rational decisions together?
I think that there's a limited ability to make decisions on a local scale in certain places. I think that undeniably small groups of people united by a common purpose of one sort or another can achieve things in spite of being in an environment that is designed to preserve certain structures of authority way past the point where those structures are of any benefit to anyone. I don't really see this country as a democracy. Democracy presupposes the idea of free speech, and what we have here is speech doesn't really matter. I can say anything, and nobody particularly sees that as significant. What is significant is the ability to amplify that speech using various types of industrial techniques that limit access because they're owned centrally. So newspapers, television stations and channels, etc., just about every type of public medium, except for little outlets like blogs on the internet, are tightly controlled. And the ability to reach a mass audience does not really depend on the message you have. It depends on how that message is amplified. And so that is not the essence of free speech. That is the essence of propaganda and control. So there's a lot of ability to propagandize and control people, and no ability to actually have a deliberative process that includes the population at large. That is just completely missing. And the other thing is that the people who thrive in that sort of a situation where basically it's the technical ability to get your message out as opposed to message itself that is important, are not people who come up with ideas. They're basically demagogues of various kinds, like Sarah Palin, for instance. She's a very good case of basically kind of like a Barbie doll spokesperson that doesn't really get any kind of a message out. She is the message. She's like a packaged thing that draws people's attention. Not because she has great ideas. She doesn't have any ideas. And that's the whole idea. You don't really want ideas. You want to control behavior. So in a situation where you're controlling behavior, you're not going to legislate useful things.
Well, during the last election, when McCain selected Palin as his running mate, I thought it was a brilliant move because it was a way of placing kind of putting into conflict one brand against another. Obama struck me as very much the same kind of character as Palin, in so much as he was mostly a self-contained product, a brand, and his ideas, in which he had some, were really something quite different and apart from the image and the brand that he was presenting. So I agree with you. I would say that characterizes our political and system, and really how we interact with the world to a very large degree. That we interact with brands and images and propaganda, and not with ideas, as the system's working right now.
Yeah, and I don't really see the system working any better because a democratic process is generally a luxury. If you look at what countries go through when they're in crisis, they never decide, oh, well, we're in crisis and let's just canvass everyone's opinion. Let's be very inclusive and let's deliberate and include everyone and have town hall, meetings everywhere and decide and, formulate new policy that way. They don't do that. Ever since the Roman Republic, in case of war, they would appoint a dictator. The Senate would elect a dictator. That's where the term dictator came from. When you're in crisis, you find somebody who will tell you what to do.
Have you read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine?
I've looked at it, yes. I think I have a problem. I have an issue with what she says because her emphasis is on this idea that these Westerners who blunder into disrupted situations and make them worse are actually the most important thing about them. It ascribes too much significance to these people. Yes, they can make things worse, they generally do, but they're just not that interesting or important.
Well, it's not so much the people, but the policies that she was describing.
Well, the policies don't matter either. You can get horrible results to happen with all sorts of different policies. I think she has a general point which is valid, which is you take a country in crisis and you send in some Western advisors and send in some money, and the next thing you know, the situation there is even worse. It's the corrupting influence of foreigners and money. Whether they have a shock doctrine that they follow or some other doctrine, well, their basic point is greed and extracting resources and exploiting the locals, and that has never changed. So this isn't really something dramatically new.
Well, what she describes is a process of privatizing or liberalizing the Soviet economy and how that impacted the population. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, and you sort of already answered, to what extent you feel that liberalizing or privatizing the Soviet economy contributed to collapse.
It's really hard to tell. I would say that the fact that it was, the wholesale theft of public property in the Soviet Union that went under the guise of privatization was a particularly bad way of stealing. I could imagine better or worse ways of stealing everything in sight. This one favored a small number of politically connected people that had connections with the Yeltsin administration. There was just a lot of corruption there, and so that sort of streamlined the process. So a lot of stuff ended up in Swiss bank accounts and offshore. Gave rise to this entire criminal class that Putin partially exiled, partially put behind bars, and now it's a bit less of a problem. It gave rise to this really nasty billionaire class. So that was a bad side effect of it. I think that privatization of real estate, for instance, in Russia, gave rise to some very large holdings that probably shouldn't have existed. But on the other hand, a lot of the apartments that got privatized allowed people to own their place of residence free and clear. So that was a clear positive for the people. So that was definitely a positive. Overall, I would say that this was, starting from nothing, a way of creating the sort of economic elite that exists in a lot of third world countries, and Central America, for instance, where a few families, well-connected families, own everything, own most of the country. And it was done in record time. So that is the pattern that I saw.
Well, Noam Chomsky, who is a hero of mine, has been saying for years that the goal of the neoliberal project was to bring the third world model home to the United States. And it strikes me that while there are absolutely real-world, bedrock issues of energy and resources that we have to face, that part of what we need to face also is how those resources are being allocated and distributed, and who has access to them, and what we want to do with the shrinking pie that we have left. Do you agree that some of what's happening is when you go into a third world situation is by design, that it has that the criminal class that becomes immensely rich, that process immiserates the population?
Well, that would be like designing for stupidity, designing for maximum stupidity. So what is the difference between that and just being stupid? It's sort of like the Occam's razor approach. If you can sit down and do lots of math to do something stupid, or you can just go ahead and get the same stupid result just by being an idiot, which would you prefer to do? Which saves you the most energy? And, Noam Chomsky's idea that there's some sort of political cabal that wants to take the United States back to third world status, that just seems so strange to me, because this country was kind of a backwater during the Great Depression, and it only managed to surface because of World War II, which it didn't really participate in to the same extent as other countries. It was a late comer to the game, and didn't get destroyed in the process. It didn't get bombed to oblivion. So it was the only industrial power left standing for a while until the Soviet Union recovered. And that gave it the lead it needed to really run the economy. It also had more oil than Saudi Arabia at that point, and it developed oil-based infrastructure, so it was an oil exporter for a while. It just had that little flash-in-the-pan economy, post-World War II economy, that allowed it to rise above third world status for a few generations. And now it's going to collapse back to third world status, because what really determines that is it has nothing to do with what people want to do. It's the hand they're dealt.
When you say that model just represents stupidity, from the perspective of someone who's trying to maximize their profits by going offshore and growing on a kind of a global scale, while controlling their expenses by, pushing down the rights of the people in the labor market and ecological concerns. How is it stupid to move to a third world model?
Because you're basically killing your own consumer. You're destroying your base of operations. You may have some money, but it's denominated by a country that is now defunct economically. So it's sort of like making $1 million shrinking dollars instead of making $100 that hold their value. In the end, it doesn't really make sense at all. Right.
Yeah, and that is that irrationality of the system is something that has been talked about in Marxist circles for decades and decades, and that ultimately the production process for profit does have this impact of reducing the ability of the consumer to consume. But while it may be irrational on a collective level, for each company, it's not irrational to seek to push down the labor market, to immiserate your labor pool, and extract as much profit from that process as you can.
Yes, it can be. In the short run, that tendency of private greed to undermine public purpose can be mitigated in various ways, mostly political involvement in running economic affairs and setting economic policy. In the long term, the unintended consequences of anything you do will thwart your purpose. In the end, as Douglas Adams famously put it, people are a problem. Any kind of a system that you put together to control human behavior will eventually fail.
So you don't really see a social solution then? This is mostly about then individuals or small groups of individuals kind of hunkering down rather than trying to change the way we organize the world economy or the political structures. That's not something you think is viable.
Well, I've never seen it be viable. All my life, I've seen just mass stupidity, and the larger the scale, the greater the stupidity. I mean, just look at the number of nuclear weapons stockpiled by the Soviet Union and the United States, and you realize that you're dealing with some incredibly powerful but incredibly stupid people who've labored for generations to make things even more stupid. I mean, I don't want to use the word stupid exclusively throughout the interview. It's just that you're sort of pushing me in the direction of saying, why don't we decide that, okay, and my answer to that is the people involved are too stupid. I'm sorry.
Okay, and that means not just the people at the top, but all the way down.
There's a limit to what we can do. I know what I can do. I've accomplished a few things during my lifetime. And I've seen other people accomplish greater things than me. More power to them. But overall, just in terms of the entire scheme of humanity as a decision-making, deliberative body, or even a body that can understand what's happening to it, what it's doing on a useful scale, I've never seen it. In the end, as Douglas Adams famously put it, people are a problem. Any kind of a system that you put together to control human behavior will eventually fail. You're sort of pushing me in the direction of saying, why don't we decide that, okay, and my answer to that is the people involved are too stupid, I'm sorry. Overall, just in terms of the entire scheme of humanity as a decision-making, deliberative body, or even a body that can understand what's happening to it, what it's doing on a useful scale, I've never seen it.
Historically, have there been any sustained examples on a substantial scale of societies which approximated to the anarchist ideal?
A good example of a really large-scale anarchist revolution, or largely anarchist revolution, is the Spanish Revolution in 1936, in which, most of Republican Spain, there was a quite inspiring, in my view, anarchist revolution that involved both industry and agriculture over substantial areas. Workers in farms and factories proved quite capable of managing their affairs without coercion from above, contrary to what lots of socialists, communists, liberals, and others wanted to believe.
Why do we need an economic vision? I think we need it partly to overcome Tina, the idea that there is an alternative, which to me is, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest, I suspect it may be the largest, obstacle to popular participation and dissidence in trying to create something better. Just the feeling that it's hopeless. I mean, you're crazy. What are you asking me to do? You're asking me to blow into the wind. You're asking me to fight gravity, right? War, poverty, disease, all these things is just part of life. Grow up. Get a life. Stop trying to oppose what's inevitable. That's the way most people see it. Like I might say to somebody who said to me, let's form a movement against aging. And I would just laugh and say, get a life. And he'd say back, yeah, but aging hurts. And I'd say, yeah, so? It isn't sufficient to say it hurts. You'd have to say that there's some alternative to it for it to make sense to have a movement against it. If there's no alternative to some poverty and some plenty, there's no point in having a movement against it, no matter how much it hurts. That's people's belief. It isn't that poverty is pleasant. Nobody believes that anymore. But everybody thinks that it's just the way it is. Okay, so I think we need an economic vision to overcome Tina, and I think we need it to know where we want to go, so that we can try to get there instead of winding up someplace else.
Well, so tell me a little bit about the things that you're doing as an individual that you think that you enjoy and that you think are useful.
Well, I went through a program of personal cultural transformation of sorts. I don't mean to make it sound so pompous, but basically my wife and I some time ago realized that just working and trying to save money and that sort of thing is ridiculous. It's just not working. And so we decided to make some dramatic changes. And we decided that the two things that are just basically bleeding us dry, not allowing us to get anything done that we actually want to get done, are the car and the house. They're the biggest points of resource and financial expenditure, energy expenditure and financial expenditure, the biggest sources of debt, And so if we get rid of those two things, then things automatically get better. So our choice was to sell the house and the car and get a sailboat, a handmade custom sailboat that I can maintain myself. And we lived aboard this boat for a couple of years. We're taking a short break right now because I'm refitting the boat. But then we'll be back on board and sailing around again. And the beautiful thing about a boat of this sort is not only does it traverse large chunks of the planet without any fossil fuel inputs, but it's also a really wonderful test bed for all kinds of green adaptive technologies that make you independent. So we have solar panels, we have a wind generator, we have a rainwater collection and filtration system, we have a composting toilet, lots of other systems that basically make this boat into an autonomous survival capsule, if you will. Just to give you an example, the fellow who sold me this boat, the night he was prepping the boat for delivery, a big tropical storm blew up. This was in Virginia at the time, and all the lights went out, and it was howling outside and big waves, etc. He was in a cove tied up to a dock, and so he spent the night on the boat because that was the only place in Virginia that had electricity that night. So that's the typical case. Is everything around you is complicated and fragile, but you can create around yourself a realm that you fully control and fully understand that is not complicated and not fragile. And that is the direction I'm going. Now, living on a boat is not for everyone, but the thing is, if you want to do this style of experimentation, then it's very difficult to do it in your own house because you have to get building permits and you have to get everything inspected and insured, and it has to be in accordance with some code that is obsolete and doesn't really take account of the things you're putting together. And it just gets incredibly complicated. Your owners association might get involved and forbid you to do this or that. But on a boat, there's just the Coast Guard, and they only care about certain types of safety precautions. So you're pretty much free to do anything. And so I'm using the sailboat as a test bed for various types of technologies that can make a huge difference in people's lives and untie them from this very fragile, very expensive, very energy inefficient realm in which they currently dwell.
So if people wanted to know more about that and they went to your website, cluborloff.blogspot.com, and made a donation and got your book, Hold the Applause, would they find out more about those technologies that you're experimenting with and your life on the boat?
Yes, the book has a chapter, an article in it called The New Age of Sail, which was written a couple of years ago, but it's not out of date. I've confirmed everything I wrote in that article by experiment afterwards. And it talks about all of the adaptive technology that goes into a sailboat and why it's such a great idea. It was called My Manifesto by Ben McGrath from the New Yorker magazine. And it is sort of my manifesto. It's what my wife and I have been doing for a few years now, and it's working out great.
Dmitry, it was great talking to you today. Is there anything that I haven't asked you or that we didn't talk about that you would like to talk about?
One thing that I just want to very briefly mention is I'm working on a book. The working title is The 5 Stages of Collapse. It's based on a taxonomy of collapse, a classification scheme that I came up with a couple of years ago that has turned out to be pretty accurate in terms of what's happened so far. And it allows people to figure out when various things collapse and how they interrelate and how they can adjust their living situation and compensate in order to make it through. So I'll be working on that book over the next few months. It should probably be out in the next 6 months to a year. And so I hope that people buy it when it comes out.
Well, that's good to hear, and I will be glad to have you back on the Diet Soap podcast when that book comes out, if you're still interested.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Hey, it was great talking to you today, Dmitry, and thank you for participating with the Diet Soap podcast.
Thank you.
It starts with an earthquake, birds, snakes, an airplane, Kemosabe, not afraid. I have a hurricane. Listen to yourself. Churn. World starts its own needs. I'm sure your needs. Feet off, all speed, run. No strength. The ladder starts ladder with fear. Fight down. Hot wire. And the fire representing 7 games. Government for hire. And the combat side. Left or west coming in. Hurry with your feet down your neck. Team team border battle. Trump, Rock. Look at that low lane. Fine. Then overflow. Population. Time to food. Take yourself. Serve yourself. World starts its own needs. Listen to your heart. Lead. Dummy with the rapture and the river and the right. Right. Patriotic. Stand by. Right. Feeling pretty psyched. It's the end of the world as we know it. I know it. You know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. As we knew it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine.
Waterboarding is misnamed. It should be called the drowning torture.
6 o'clock. Or don't get up, Twin Towers. Burn, return. Listen to yourself. Locking out uniform. Burning with barrels. Everybody escalate. Automate. Incinerate. Right hand. Right match. Stand up. Stand down. Watch your back. Crush. That means no fear. Cavalier. Renovate. Stare clear. Tournament of life. Offer me solutions. Offer me alternatives. And I decline. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. I just got to know how I feel. It's time I had some time alone. I feel the same way. It's time I had some time alone. We're getting there. We're getting there. Heads up. Who wants to walk around thinking there's a war about to hit us? I mean, that is a terrible system. I believe the majority of people want to live in a peaceful world. That's what I believe. Because otherwise, we're looking at the potential of this kind of world. A world in which modern governments get toppled by people willing to murder the innocent. And if that were to occur, people would look back at this day and age and say, what happened to those people in 2007? How come they couldn't see the threat to a future generation of people? And look, I understand here in Washington, some people say we're not at war. I know that. They're just wrong, in my opinion. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine.
How are you holding up, sir?
I feel just fine.
Deze voicemailbox accepteert geen berichten. Dank u voor uw oproep. Tot ziens.
Hey man, it is KMO, and I was just trying out Skype to see how it works with this internet connection, but I suppose I could also be saying, congratulations on your 50th podcast. So, peace.
Well, that just about wraps up the 50th episode of the Diet Soap Podcast. This week, the music you heard included the Vitamin Quartet and George W. Bush's cover of the REM classic, It's the End of the World as You Know It. You also heard an instrumental version of Simon and Garfunkel's I Am a Rock, played on acoustic guitar by the YouTube star Degas E1, which was blended with Frederick Rzuski's performance of his own composition, The People United Will Never Be Defeated. The voices you heard on that collage included Noam Chomsky, providing some historical context supporting the idea that people might be smart enough to change the way they live, and Michael Albert suggesting that it may be important to develop a vision that challenges the notion that there is no alternative. Again, Albert was saying that, in fact, there is an alternative to capitalism. Finally, right now you're listening to Woot's Orbit's cover of the Doors song, The End. It was a pleasure talking to Dmitry Orlov this week, and you'll find links to his blog and to his new book, Hold the Applause, in this week's show notes. I was also glad to get a voicemail from KMO, and if you'd like to leave a voicemail, you can do that. Just do what KMO did, and that's contact me on Skype. I'm Doug Lane, or just call 971-285-4604. That's 971-285-4604. Next week, we'll be talking to Robert Jensen, who is the author of an essay entitled Giving Up Hope and Faith. Jensen is, unlike some of my more recent guests, a committed socialist or leftist, anyhow. And after we talk to him, we'll be talking to Bud Hopkins about his art and about his research into alien abductions. But for now, let's close out this week with another Titanic Factoid from my lovely wife, Miriam.
Before I start the factoid, Doug has asked me to mention that the George W. Bush cover you heard was not in fact one of his collages, but was put together by the YouTuber X2008. That is, as far as we can tell, that's who deserves credit. So on to the Titanic, which did go down in the old-fashioned way. In fact, the old-fashioned women and children first was that kind of chivalry was the order of the day when it came to loading the lifeboats. It became clear at a certain point that the Titanic was definitely going down and that not everyone was going to make it off the ship. There simply wasn't enough room in the lifeboats. And much has been said and can be said about the class disparity. Certainly there were many rich and famous people on the Titanic, some of whom survived and some of whom did not. The disparities between those who got on the boats and those who didn't relative to class are interesting, but much has also been written about the heroism of those aboard the ship who were loading the boats. Charles Lightoller, who was helping on one side, worked tirelessly all evening and just barely made it onto a boat at the end. Ben Guggenheim, who was very rich and famous, I think I've mentioned him before, but he and his secretary went and dressed in their best evening clothes. He wrote, "No woman shall be left aboard this ship because Ben Guggenheim was a coward." He wrote that in a message for his wife. When they had laid aside their life belts and changed into evening clothes, he said, "We've dressed in our best and prepared to go down like gentlemen." Many women did not want to get into the lifeboats without their husbands. The Strausses would not be separated, and both went down with the ship. But I definitely would like to read to you something about the work that people did together to help each other on board the ship, written by Emma Goldman on April 21st, 1912, for the Denver Post. And this is actually entitled "Suffrage Dealt Blow by Women of Titanic." It's hard to see that in this passage, but I shall read it to you anyways. "To die for those we love is no small matter in a world where each is for himself and the devil take the hindmost. But to die for those far removed from us by a cold and cruel social and material gulf, for those who by their very position must needs be our enemies, for those who, a few moments before the disaster, probably never gave a thought to the toilers and pariahs of the ship, is so wonderful a feat of human nature as to silence forever the ridiculous argument against the possibilities of human nature. The average Philistine forever prates of how human nature must be coerced and beaten, how it must be kept in check and disciplined. How little he knows of the grandeur of human nature has never before been so magnificently demonstrated as by the crew of the Titanic, the sailors, stokers, workers, and drones belonging to the disinherited of the earth. With neither club nor statute to compel them, I wonder what induced these men to go to their death with greater fortitude than do soldiers on the battlefield. Why, it is human nature, stripped of all social artifice, of the deadening and dulling chase for material gains. Human nature come into its own, into its deep social kinship, which so far has only expressed itself in great stress, but which points to still greater possibilities for the future, when man shall no longer his brother maim.